We aired the show in November 2020, and at that time, Rosa was our author. So I think it's a good time for us to reflect back on what we've done, look at what we're doing now, and have a look into the future. For the past 2 years, it has been a bit of an organized scramble as we're at the mercy of authors and their availability. From the very beginning, I've attempted to take a sense-making approach and talk to authors and understand how they make sense of the real world from a practical point of view. This timeline shows how safety thinking has evolved over the years. There are two themes. One is how humans are treated and how safety is perceived. While we've had some discussions about Safety 1 and Safety 2, we are in the age of cognitive complexity, and you can see from those 4 bullets, things are quite different. We've had several authors talk about safety as an emergent property of a complex adaptive system, such as Michael Sheveldave, Carson Bush, and David Proven. We learned from Marianne Kiley that humans are storytellers. She collected stories in order to understand well-being in an organization. And in their last show, Alan Keller and audience participants shared their stories of overcoming mental health issues. The third bullet in the age of cognitive complexity is resilience versus robustness. Resilience is often mentioned during our shows. We've talked about organizational resilience as well as personal resilience. So let me explain what I mean by that. There are 3 basic systems in a complex adaptive system: order, chaos, and complex. The fold between order and chaos represents a cliff, or if you like, the edge of chaos. If you're in the order system, and if you're not careful, you can fall over the cliff and into chaos. In safety, that's typically what an accident or an injury is all about. Let's make a couple of improvements. Instead of basic systems, we'll call them domains. We'll split order into complicated and clear, and add a 5th domain in the middle, and we'll call it confused. It's a state of not knowing what specific domain you are presently in. People who are in stressful situations often think they are in chaos, but really they're in the confused domain. They're just really uncertain and not sure where to go and how to resolve their problems. Instead of taking action, you are confused and not quite sure which way to turn. This is the Cynefin framework. It's a sense-making framework. We can use it to make sense of the real world. Each domain has its own problem-solving methodology. Let's start with a complicated domain where experts reside. I believe our book authors are experts, as well as the many people that join us on our shows. These experts in the complicated domain are involved in creating regulations and policy standards that the workers in the clear domain apply. Workers sense what's going on, and then they can call upon their past experiences, which are cataloged in their minds, and just get the work done. In the chaotic domain, this is typically a plunge over the cliff and into chaos. The movement is a physical change, such as a vehicle breakdown, machine failure, or worse, a human injury, accident, fatality. Accidents are always unexpected surprises. The goal is to act quickly by following a leader in charge of implementing an emergency plan. First responder steps include attending to human injuries, making this immediate work environment safe, and stabilizing the situation. These actions move the operating point into the confused domain. And in the confused domain, there is now time to think about what is the next best step to take. The complex domain is interesting. This is when we don't quite know what's going on, so we have to probe the system and experiment to discover what hidden patterns are there. And hopefully, a team, such as a learning team, can develop a new safe solution which can be brought into the complicated domain to be written up and documented as a new procedure or process. Smart experts understand applying complicated methods to analyze a complex problem won't work. They know when to move into the complex domain to probe and experiment. Expertise entrapment is a concern. You become so good at using a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You know this is happening when a group of experts get together and they spend their time arguing and defending their positions as opposed to looking for some common solution. This slide expands on the safety context in each domain. You can see in the complicated and clear, it's really about stability, repeatability, predictability, while on the left side with the complex and chaotic, this is where the work environment is unpredictable, ambiguous, uncertain, turbulent, and volatile. When you hear someone talking about a VUCA environment, they're referring to being on the left side of the Cynefin framework. The last bullet on the evolution of safety timeline is safety measurement, impact versus outcome. On the right side in the complicated clear domain, we can actually measure outcomes because we have if-then causal relationships. However, on the left side with complex, we really can't measure, so we monitor impact. We launch an experiment, and then we monitor the impact of that experiment. Did people behave in a positive manner, or did they deliver negative consequences? During our shows, we've had conversations about moving away from individual behavior and looking at system behavior or conditions. What you see on this graphic are the constraints, which are the system conditions that influence how people behave. Rigid or fixed constraints in the clear domain are the hard safety rules that all workers must follow in compliance. Best practices essentially means there's only one way that you can do the work and no other choices are permitted. Governing constraints in the complicated domain means that there's probably more than one right answer. So therefore, you can have some choices. Therefore, we will create guidelines that people can follow. Enabling constraints sounds like an oxymoron. An example would be assembling a learning team in the complex domain to probe the system. The team is enabled with resources, but are constrained by the task direction and what to deliver by a certain time. In the chaotic domain, there are no constraints. Everything is random. There's no if-then causal relationships that you can count on. So that's why you have to quickly act to get out. With the Cynefin framework describing how we can make sense of safety in the real world, we can now address robustness and resilience. Robustness is the organizational capacity and ability to establish system conditions to prevent a failure and a plunge into the chaotic domain. This has been the Safety One focus over the past century, looking at where things could go wrong, analyzing risk, and then putting in barriers, removing hazards so that the organization can survive. Resilience is sensing that something has changed. In the red zone, which is the boundary between the clear and the chaotic domains, workers proactively respond by adjusting or adapting work conditions to prevent a failure from unexpectedly happening. Safety 2 is observing what's going right. That includes workers making adjustments in their on-the-job work conditions. We call this early detection of weak signals. What we are trying to detect are emerging signs of hitting tipping points that, if reached, may lead to a plunge into the chaotic domain. At a personal resilience level, this could be emotional alerts that a person is having mental health issues, which could lead to suicidal action. Another type of resilience takes place in the complex domain. Conducting trial and error experiments, listening to workers' stories about unexpected changes in the field are a couple examples of resilient work in a lab setting. Because the future is uncertain and unpredictable, we must first understand what's happening in the present. This slide shows some work we've been doing with commercial pilots in the aviation industry. 95% of the time the plane is in the air, pilots are working in the clear and complicated domains. We should be quite thankful as passengers. The flight is normal and everything is going according to standards. This is robustness. Around 3% of the time, pilots may need to make adjustments because of some warning light or some audio alert has gone off. This is when pilots exercise resilience. The remaining 2% is spent in the chaotic, confused, and complex domains. Of course, no one wants to fall into the chaotic domain with an unanticipated surprise, like a cabin fire or a disruptive passenger on board. Hopefully, most of it is in the confused domain. Perhaps it's contacting ground control and trying to figure out the congested flight circumstances prior to landing. Or worse, having to deviate from the scheduled path due to extreme uncontrollable weather. So where do we go from here? I think the themes that we have been highlighting, such as resilience and complexity, continue to be popular and worthwhile value adds. Our challenge going forward might be finding these authors who are publishing books on these emerging topics. Consequently, we may need to go beyond the traditional book author and reach out to others who are releasing articles on groundbreaking research in safety science. Articles for our Meet the Author show will not be purely academic ones, but articles that have practical value and that can answer that elusive how-to question. Working in our favor is that safety professionals and practitioners are facing a change in the safety industry. No longer do they just solely concentrate on physical safety, pursue Safety 1 tools and methods, but now they are expected to stretch into psychological safety. And that requires learning about different fields such as cognitive neuroscience, well-being, anthropology. I look forward to reading about and listening to people share their resilient experiences in the form of stories. And I'm also excited to explore on Meet the Author how safety is entangled with other issues such as environmental, social, technological, and political. In what ways can we navigate complexity so that safety emerges and not danger in a complex adaptive system?